Good afternoon, and welcome to the second session of the Federal Reserve System's new Community Development Research Seminar Series. I'm Matushka Lindo-Briggs, Director of Special Projects and Strategic Support for the Community Development Department at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. The Federal Reserve Community Development Research Seminar Series is a forum for exploring the intersection of research, policy, and practice in the community development field. The series expands access to high-quality research that informs stakeholders who are working to support low and moderate income communities and communities of color. In August, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors presented a research seminar focused on issues related to the employment experiences of low-income workers during the pandemic and how to improve the financial security of these workers. Today, we seek to build on that conversation as the Federal Reserve Banks of Kansas City and Dallas, along with our presenters, explore issues related to women's economic declines during COVID-19 and the ability of women to participate in the labor market post-pandemic. Before turning the event over to Alfreda Norman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, I would like to go to our next slide and run through some housekeeping for our webinar. If you haven't joined us through the webinar yet, go ahead and click the link you received after registering. For the best webinar experience, please use the Chrome or Microsoft Edge browser. We also have provided an FAQ document which can be found using the Materials button on the webinar player page. Now let me highlight a few important notes for you. For the best webinar experience, we recommend you use the web stream to consume this live video event through your computer speakers. If you have technical issues, you are welcome to dial into the phone number posted on the player page, but the video will not sync perfectly with the phone audio. We will be taking questions from our audience in two ways today. Please submit them using the Ask Question button or email them to communities@stls.frb.org. Please note that all event materials and a recording will be available on fedcommunities.org following this event. Additionally, as we move to the next slide, I'd like to share that the opinions and statements expressed in this presentation today are those of the speakers and are intended only for informational purposes. They do not reflect official positions of any Federal Reserve banks or the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. I'd now like to formally introduce Alfreda Norman, Senior Vice President at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Alfreda, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Matushka, and good morning to all of our attendees. I'm glad to be with you today. My name is Alfreda Norman, and I'm a Senior Vice President at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, and I oversee our Communications and Public Outreach Department, which includes our community development work. The Dallas Fed is grateful to be co-hosting today's seminar with our friends at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. This series, Towards an Inclusive Recovery, could not be timelier. None of us could have predicted the impact of our COVID-19 pandemic on our economy and on our communities in the past year and a half. Now that we're starting to turn the office lights back on and revisit our favorite businesses, it's essential that we bring everyone along in the recovery. When we consider our mandate of maximum employment, the Federal Reserve is clear-eyed in the importance of economic inclusion for all. Today, we're going to spend time learning about one very large and important part of our workforce, women. Historically, women's labor force participation grew steadily in the second half of the 20th century, peaking around the year 2000. After the Great Recession, women lost some of these gains, but the COVID-19 pandemic proved to have a much larger impact. In the year between February 2020 and February 2021, 2.4 million women left the workforce, compared to 1.8 million men. As we'll discuss today, this departed from previous economic downturns, which disproportionately affected men. And while the economy has made considerable gains in the past 18 months, there is still work to be done. This will take time. Women's labor force participation remains below pre-pandemic levels, even as men have all but made up their losses in the labor market. And some women, including women of color, mothers, and those with lower levels of education, disproportionately remain out of the labor force. Our first panel will help us understand why the COVID-19 recession disproportionately hurt women, how the recovery remains uneven, and what lessons we've learned as we get back to work. Dr. C. Nicole Mason is the president and CEO of the Institute for Women's Policy Research and will be moderating the first panel this morning. As the woman who first coined the phrase she-cession, I think she's just the right person to open up this panel of experts. Dr. Mason, the floor is yours.
So thank you so much, Alfreda. I'm really excited to be here and be a part of this conversation. We are in an extraordinary moment, one that, again, at the top of 2020, we could not have seen coming, because at the top of January 2020, we were celebrating a significant milestone. Women comprise more than 50% of the labor force. While we were celebrating, I was cautiously optimistic because I knew and understood through my own work that even though women were 50% of the labor force at that time, many of these jobs were really precarious, lower wage jobs, and had little job security. And a few months later, with the pandemic, all but most, if not all of those gains had been wiped out. And we entered an economic downturn defined by income and economic losses by women, mainly because they were employed in the hardest hit sectors: leisure, hospitality, education, and the service industries. In June, when the vaccine became readily available, I believe that in June, we were all really optimistic that we were turning a corner and that we would see employment gains, myself included. I thought and predicted by the third quarter of this year, with schools and daycares reopening, we would see a robust reentry of women into the workforce. And that just has not happened. In fact, in September, 309,000 women dropped out of the labor force. And although the unemployment rate for women has dropped to pre-pandemic levels, the unemployment rate for Black and Latino women still remains higher than before the pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to, one, how we think about how we might reimagine an economy that works for women, how we might craft programs and policies that ensure that women are not only able to re-enter the workforce, but are able to sustain employment, and also talk about what might happen. I'm really interested to hear from our panelists, what might happen if we don't do that? How might we delay women's an economic recovery that is inclusive and ensures that women are able to re-enter the workforce? And I think part of that answer is not only about job creation and helping women to reenter the market, but making sure that some of the systems that were not working for women, specifically the childcare system or our broken childcare infrastructure, that we have those things in place, and also pay attention to policies that we know made the difference for women during the recession, like paid sick and family leave and high quality health care. So with that, I want to say that I'm really very excited to be with three very distinguished economists who have been doing such significant work in this area before the pandemic, but their work has become critical in this moment for helping us to understand what's happening with women and communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Stevenson, who's done a significant amount of work, and we tend to cross paths a lot more these days.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and I enjoy how much we cross paths these days. I wanted to start by giving you a little, picking up on where we just left off, which is we were at a place where women held the majority of non-farm payroll jobs. This is because the U.S. economy has become increasingly a service sector economy. 80% of the jobs are in the service sector, and women hold the majority of jobs in the service sector. And that trend was going forward And I personally in February said out loud, February of 2020, I can't imagine what could derail this. I couldn't imagine a global pandemic that caused our first ever service sector led recession. Most of the time, people do not stop, buying goods and things that are manufactured. Most of the time they do stop buying those types of things, and they keep getting their hair cut. This recession was the complete opposite, and we saw dental assistants laid off. We saw, leisure and hospitality, but a lot of healthcare services, a lot of education, a lot of things that women do in person. So it was really the sector that caused that initial first hit. And if you go to my next slide, sorry, I'm stumbling because I realize I can't see which slide you see, but I hope you're seeing slide 2, which shows that normally women's employment doesn't dip very much in a recession, and then women recover first. And that's really, really important in terms of thinking about how recoveries tend to happen. Now, where are we right now? Well, first of all, I think it's important to realize that women and men struggled also due to caregiving. So we go to my third slide where I show that parents struggled, both moms and dads. And it wasn't just about losing jobs. What we actually saw was men and women made sacrifices like cutting back their hours, changing their careers, pausing training and upskilling. All of those sacrifices are going to continue to shape their careers for years to come, and also are shaping where they're at right now today. So if you move to my next slide, I think the thing that I've been most surprised at as I look at this recovery is we have seen that women and men are coming back at roughly the same rates until the Delta variant hit. So August and September, we saw bigger gains for men than for women, but prior to that, they've been coming back at roughly the same rates. But if you break it down by age, it's actually been slower recovery for younger women. And then younger women are more likely to be in those sort of more vulnerable occupations, places where the employers are not putting as much effort into necessarily hanging on to them. It's not just about caregiving, though, because a lot of those women in sort of middle ages also have caregiving responsibilities. But, something going on in particular with young women. But beyond what is happening on maybe the labor demand side, we can dig into a little bit what's happening on labor supply. And what we see is people really want to change right now. So if we look at the data, we see that parents are really looking for some kind of change. Not all of them want to work fewer hours. Some of them actually want a better career, a career that's going to better provide for their family, but it's an unprecedented amount of change. And what that's led to sort of overall, when we look at the aggregate statistics in surveys, is more than half of people saying that they're looking to change jobs. And that tells us a lot about what's going on in the economy right now. It feels a little bit like we're at a moment in the US where work-family balance has finally become central to families, and that's shaping how they look for work. But I want you to realize as you go to the next slide, where we see industry transitions are up across most industries, that we're seeing that people are changing jobs, not just changing jobs, but changing industries and changing occupations as they seek out something a little bit better for them. And if you go to my next slide, slide 7, what's unusual is mothers are changing industries more than fathers. And so we're seeing that industry shifting happening across the people who've been both hurt by the pandemic and people who managed to hang on, but they now feel like it's really time for a change. And you see in particular with those younger women and younger workers, where we haven't seen the gaps closed as much between men and women, that really high numbers of people saying it's time for a change. 77% of Generation Z, 63% of millennials planning to look for some kind of new position. And this is also very elevated among minority workers. So I want to end on sort of 2 last points. One is what are people looking for? And I think a lot of this has to do, again, with parenting and caregiving becoming more central in people's lives, realizing that they've been trying to balance their work around it unsuccessfully. They want jobs with lower stress, more flexibility, being able to work from home some of the time if they can, and better work-life balance. Why are we seeing so many job changes right now? I feel like all the stories around this have gotten it a bit wrong. If we go to my next and final slide, lots of jobs, lots of job changers, we see that there is a reduction in fear and uncertainty, and that's leading people to making changes. And we also saw a big the increase in fear and uncertainty that came with the Delta wave starting to slow things down. As the Delta wave recedes, things are going to pick back up. But if Delta Plus is 2 to 3 months out, we could see another slowdown. There's been time to reflect on our career and our life, which I think has led a lot of people to make, come to different conclusions, make different choices. And we have changing values and priorities about our work-life balance. And then the final thing that's leading to this world in which we have lots of quits, lots of job changes, and maybe not as many people in jobs, is we're in a strong job market with lots of opportunities. Economists will always tell people, the best time to make a job change is when there's a lot of job openings. The best time to take your time looking for work is when there's a lot of job openings. We finally have gotten a labor market that's strong enough that's put a little bit of bargaining power back in the hands of workers. I don't know how long that's going to last, but for now, what we see is that workers are able to negotiate better wages and better working conditions than they were able to prior to the pandemic. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Holder.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Dr. Mason. I am Michelle Holder. I'm the president and CEO of the Washington Center for Equitable Growth in DC. First, allow me to thank the Federal Reserve Banks of Dallas and St. Louis, as well as Anna Crockett for inviting me to participate in this important panel discussion today. And of course, I want to thank Dr. Mason for moderating and my esteemed fellow panelists. I want to focus on three main flashpoints as it relates to the COVID-19 inspired economic downturn. How did we get here? What is the current economic landscape? And where do we go from here? So how did this she-cession, as Dr. Mason coined, come to be? Early in the pandemic, I co-authored a paper with Janelle Jones, chief economist of the Department of Labor, and Tom Masterson, a research scholar at the Levy Economics Institute of Bard College, where we examined the impact of COVID-19 on Black women's employment and unemployment. What became clear is that the COVID-19 inspired downturn presented key distinctions from previous downturns, and these distinctions highlighted key fragilities in our economy. Some of what I'm about to say, Dr. Stevenson already mentioned, so I will mention it again. The recessions of the early 1980s, as well as the Great Recession, were downturns in which men and Black as well as Latinx workers experienced disproportionate job loss, mostly attributable to the industrial distribution of these groups. They tend to be employed in industries, primarily goods-producing industries, that are especially vulnerable in cyclical downturns. You can imagine why that is. When we are in recession, unemployment is high, people aren't spending, they're not buying things, they're not buying cars, they're not buying homes. And so the very industries where men tend to be overrepresented in, goods-producing industries, are the ones that really feel the impact initially. However, this time around, women, and particularly women of color, were bearing the brunt of early job losses, given the extraordinary nature in which economic activity was deliberately, not organically, slowed down or halted. As we well know, industries such as leisure and hospitality, retail trade, and other services, including personal care services, which really requires very direct contact between workers and customers, were labeled as non-essential. And companies operating in these industries were ordered state by state to temporarily cease or slow down operations. Industries operating in the sphere of essential services were allowed to continue, but with significant restrictions, which also resulted in declines in economic activity. Rising unemployment among women, given their overrepresentation in service industries and occupations, became pervasive, as we know. While job holding by Black women in services deemed essential, for example, in hospitals, offered some insulation against job loss, this was really not enough to offset large job losses in other sectors. Early in the pandemic, Latinas' unemployment rate was 20%, Black women's was over 16%, and white women's was 15%. Unemployment, however, only tells part of the story. Black women also experienced the steepest drop in the labor force participation rate, along with Latinas. And yet, Black women as a group has historically had higher labor force participation rates than white women, which has remained true even through the pandemic. This strong yet precarious attachment to the labor force makes Black women especially vulnerable during cyclical downturns. One key way to analyze the impact of the COVID-19 inspired downturn on the economy, alongside, of course, its extremely deadly impact on the United States, particularly marginalized communities, given that we've had over 700,000 people in the United States die from the virus, is through the lens of occupational segregation. Black women experience significant occupational segregation with just 4 occupations, including office and administrative support, healthcare support, sales, and healthcare practitioner and technical, accounting for nearly half of all the jobs in which Black women work in the US. This is consistent with a large body of feminist economic literature that shows women, including Black women, tend to be crowded in low-wage jobs, not just in the United States, but as my a colleague who will speak after me, Matthias, will note, in many other parts of the world. In addition, more than half of all employment losses for Black women early in the pandemic were concentrated in just 4 occupations in which women in general are crowded. This was the situation early on, but where are we now? Employment is still depressed for women of color. According to the latest jobs report, over 500,000 fewer Black women were employed in September than February 2020 last year. Latinas are the second female demographic group in the US facing the deepest job losses, as well as a considerable decline in their labor force participation rate. And while the unemployment rate for women, including women of color, has been on a downward trajectory, as Betsy pointed out, for the last several months, the reasons for these declines are really split between those entering or re-entering employment, but also those leaving the labor force entirely. A factor likely holding back quicker employment gains is the slow recovery in some parts of the paid care economy, where women workers are overrepresented. The sectors that provide health, education, and social services to workers, families, and communities. Employment in healthcare is down by over 500,000 since February of last year, with nursing and residential care facilities accounting for about 4/5 of the loss. Because women of color are particularly crowded in these care occupations, the fact that care work is undervalued is both a driver and a reflection of racial and gender economic inequality. So where do we go from here? It remains clear that centering women of color in the economic recovery is paramount if we are to address inequality, ensure an equitable recovery, and promote strong, stable, and broadly shared growth. We cannot have a complete recovery if we leave communities behind. And the last thing I'll say is that absolutely the issue of caregiving has been central to the position of women as a result of the pandemic. In the American labor force, fully 1/3 of women who work in this country are mothers. And as we know, during the course of this health crisis, childcare options, as well as school openings and reopenings for our children, have been stymied, have been interrupted. This directly impacts women's ability, particularly single working mothers, to re-engage or to remain engaged in the labor force. I thank you for your time. And now I turn it over to my colleague, Matthias.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to this exciting panel. I'm very happy to be here to speak about some of these very important issues that we are facing in the US economy today. So I have also done research with a number of co-authors, some in Germany, some here in the United States, on the causes of this recession, of the large impact on the labor market for women, and on the long-run consequences of that. Some of this research is empirical, some of it is more based on macroeconomics, trying to figure out the implications of these patterns for the wider economy. I want to start by just reiterating how unusual it really is what we're seeing in this current recession. So in this picture, you see for every US recession from World War II until this current one, the difference in the change in unemployment between women and men. So here, a negative number, mostly the blue bars, means that unemployment rose more for men than for women. That would be a man-cession. And the red bar for the most recent recession, for the pandemic recession, shows you that in this most recent case, unemployment rose more for women than for men. So you can see here that in most US recessions, there was either little difference in the impact on women versus men. In the 50s, for example, labor force participation of married women wasn't very high yet. And so there, the impact was similar on the relatively few women who did work and on men. In the last 5 recessions before the pandemic recession, we had man sessions. And as Michelle pointed out, we think a lot of this has to do with the industry composition of employment, that regular recessions are hitting strong in sectors such as manufacturing and transportation, for example, where you have large male employment shares where relatively few women work. So after this, we come to the pandemic recession in 2020, and you see it's first of all the opposite pattern, but you also see that in terms of magnitude, it's actually larger than anything we have seen before. So the gap in the unemployment rate between women and men is larger than any previous man session. So to put it differently, there never has been a recession that affected one gender so much more than the other. And so it's not just about the direction of the effect, it's also really unprecedented in terms of the magnitude. Now, what is behind these changes? As was already mentioned, 2 factors that are clearly important are industry composition. So as Betsy mentioned, this was really a service sector-led recession. The service sector has high female employment shares. The one sector that was really having by far the largest decline in employment is leisure and hospitality. So restaurants shut down. This is a sector that has a large share of women working, and this is one part of the large losses. So there's industry and occupation. A second part is childcare. So we see that employment losses were larger among parents. They were larger also for mothers compared to fathers. So childcare responsibilities during school closures account for a large, substantial chunk of these differences. I do want to point out that when we dig in the micro data, you in fact see that these 2 factors are important, but they're actually not. They are not accounting for all of these differences. There's something beyond that. So more specifically, even when we control for sector and occupation, so look at only employees in a given sector, in a given occupation, and we look only at workers that do not have childcare responsibilities, so either haven't had children yet or children already out of the house, even there, we see much larger employment losses for women than for men. So there's something really universal in this recession about the larger impact on women compared to men, which I think we have not really fully understood yet why that is. One hypothesis might be that there is something more wider about care responsibilities. For example, that many women also take care of maybe elder relatives, some of whom may have had pre-existing health conditions or may have gotten sick during the pandemic. This may also account for some of these wider changes. But I think understanding some of this wider impact on women beyond childcare, beyond the service sector occupations, I think that's one of the important challenges we have going forward. So now to continue on this, I think one reason we care a lot about this outcome is because we care about the future of the labor market and we care about possible policy responses. Now, what does this recession teach us in terms of whether we should adjust childcare policies, whether we should maybe adjust employment protection policies to be better prepared for a crisis of this kind? And we argue that one way you can learn about this is by looking at the evidence across countries. Because this pandemic was a worldwide pandemic, there was a worldwide recession. So we can look at what happened in other countries that have very different institutions and policies. So everybody had the same pandemic, but there's countries that have much more public childcare provision. There's countries that have much more employment protection. You can really see how the outcomes differ across these different settings, and ask what can we learn about this for the possible policy response here in the United States. To give you just one example of the outcome across different countries, here I'm showing you the pandemic recession across countries in terms of the relative change in women's versus men's employment. Here, a negative number would mean that women lost declined, had a larger decline in hours compared to men. A positive number means that men lost more employment like they would in a regular recession. So you see that most of these numbers are negative. So most countries did have a she-cession like the United States. In most countries, women reduced their employment by more. The United States, actually, in this picture, is kind of in the middle of the overall distribution. If you do the same picture in terms of employment, you see something different in terms of employment. So whether you have a job at all, in fact, the United States is kind of an outlier on the negative side. So many women lost jobs in the United States, not so much true in most other countries. We think a lot of this has to do with employment protection. So many European countries had furlough policies that made it possible to keep your job, but reduce hours during the pandemic, sometimes even to zero if there was shutdowns, and then just go back to the same job later on. And that seemed to have been successful at reducing employment losses, even though hours were reduced quite a bit. In terms of childcare policies, now one interesting example here on this picture is Sweden at the very bottom, that had the kind of largest opposite change, so where men reduced employment more. Sweden is an interesting example because Sweden has very strong provision of childcare for starting at very young ages. And Sweden also had a somewhat unusual policy response. So they really prioritized keeping schools open, keeping daycares open throughout the entire crisis. So they erected a lot less in terms of childcare provision. And you do see that this is one place where women's employment losses were, in fact, smaller than those of men. So it's kind of one suggestion that these policy differences actually have a quite substantial impact on the policy response. Now you can explore these differences across countries in a lot more detail empirically. A few factors that turn out to be associated with overall employment losses are the extent of school closures. So if you close schools for longer times and you put parents in a more difficult position in terms of taking care of the children, then overall employment losses are quite a bit larger. And of course, that's one factor that does show up in the United States. We had a lot of variation across states in school closures, but in many places, school closures were lasting an entire year. And my own son stayed at home for an entire year. So that's certainly one factor that features into this relatively large impact on the US labor market. Also important is just the share of the hospitality industry that, not so surprising because restaurants were very heavily affected, also the extent of employment protection. I want to close with one aspect, which I think is really very essential in this crisis, and I think it's also very essential to look at in terms of the future of work after this pandemic, which is the impact of whether or not you're able to work from home, whether you're able to telecommute. Because what you find is that the decline in women's labor supply relative to men is particularly large in countries where you have a relative lack of jobs that you can do from home, where women do mostly work that has to be done in person at the workplace. So among all the different factors we looked at, this issue of telecommuting, of being able to work from home, was the most closely associated with job losses for women. And in fact, to kind of make this even more pointed, if you look only among people who could work from home, in that group, among the telecommuters, you do not find any gender gaps in the employment response at all. So in the United States, if you just look at people who can work from home, there you have pretty much the same response, women and men, which is suggestive that the ability to work from home is potentially quite protective, in terms of being able to react more flexibly to a shock, say in needs for childcare, compared to others who have to be at a workplace. And that's, I think, significant for thinking about the future of work, because we do think that telecommuting will become more common in the future. It is, of course, also very informative on inequality and the impact, because the jobs you can do from home tend to be office jobs that are often requiring more education. So it's a part of the reason that we have differences in the impact across the income scale. That lower paid workers had a larger impact, often has to do with the fact that many of the lower paid jobs are service sector jobs that have to be done in person and that you cannot do from home. And so I think this issue of telecommuting is kind of very central, both to understand the overall inequality and the impact, and to think about how is the future workplace going to change as options to work from home will become more prevalent in the post-pandemic workplace. So I think I'll stop here and let's turn it over to the Q&A. Thank you.
So I'm really excited about our conversation. There's so many things that surfaced in the presentations that I want to drill down on a little bit, as we can see that this is a global economic recession or downturn, and women across the globe have been disproportionately impacted with job losses. So I want to start off by going to, this question is for you, Betsy. So you noted in your presentation that people and women are moving into new sectors, reskilling, and there's a lot of movement in the labor market, and workers seem to have some bargaining power that we haven't seen in quite some time. So how might we be able to use this moment to create workplaces that are reflective of women's experiences, including taking on issues of care, or thinking about issues of care, but also workplace flexibility, and also thinking about benefits and wages? How might we extend this moment for permanent change?
Well, I'll start with I think the easy part, which is, you and I and others have been talking about the benefits of workplace flexibility for decades. But the problem has been getting managers to understand that companies can run as efficiently being flexible as they could run if they didn't have that flexibility. In fact, more efficiently with flexibility. And then the pandemic hit, and companies that were the most flexible were the ones who were able to actually withstand the pandemic. So we started to really see the value of flexibility. And I think there was some sort of knee-jerk assumptions of costs. Like, if I let people have control over their schedule, who knows what they'll be doing? And they saw that the reality was exactly what had been predicted, which is people who could work from home, they saved on the commute, and some of that commute time became extra hours of work time. So we actually saw workers becoming more productive in that sense. So I think we learned a lot about the benefits of flexibility. I also think that we've been keeping our families like in the background and really trying to adjust our work around it and pretend that families don't exist. And we couldn't do that anymore with the pandemic. And I hope that that lasts. I hope that we now recognize our coworkers, our colleagues, our employees as people who have lives outside of work, who have emotional lives, who have needs, who have caregiving responsibilities. And there are days when they're like all focused on their work, and there are other days where there's a crisis in their life and you need to give them some space. And I hope that sticks. But I think the thing we have to do to make some of this stick is going to be to change our public policies to better support families. We can't expect companies to be the ones picking up all the slack in terms of giving people 100% paid leave when they have a new child, or if they have a caregiving crisis that they need to take time off of. We can't expect companies only out of the generosity of their heart to offer paid sick leave while their competitor doesn't. We need an even playing field. So we need, a federal program for paid leave. We need consistent rules around paid sick leave, so we're all doing the right thing together. And then we need to ensure that caregiving jobs are funded, because so many of them are, come out of programs like home health care aides, where government's responsible for the payment, and others where families just can't pay for high quality early childhood education any more than they could pay for K through 12 on their own if they were left to fund that. And so we need to be expanding our support for early childhood education. And I think we learned all those lessons in the pandemic. We as individuals can make changes, and our government can make changes that will allow us to thrive more coming out of it.
Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely right. I do think employers have a clear role to play because they're on the front lines, and women are applying to jobs right now to employers. But the federal government and also states have a really big role to play in terms of keep leveling the playing field through public policy and paid sick leave, childcare programs, so I think you're absolutely right. Michelle, I wanted to turn to you. A couple of years ago, you wrote a book focused on Black men during the Great Recession and the downturn, because that was a recession that disproportionately impacted men. But there were some lessons that we learned there, and we also saw that even when started to recover and turned away from deliberate job programs, job creation programs in 2008, there were some groups that were left behind, Black men, Black women, who were struggling up until this moment. And so what are some of the lessons that we can take that, from the 2008 recession in terms of thinking about recovery and, and into this moment as we are trying to create an equitable recovery?
Thank you for that question, Nicole. So it's interesting that, and I'm glad that you not that you cited my first book, but that you cited the fact that during the Great Recession, that was a time where, as Matthias also pointed out, a man's session. But when you disaggregate the numbers by race and ethnicity, what we saw during the Great Recession was that it was really Black men who experienced the highest unemployment rate at that time. Fast forward to this cyclical downturn, now we see that it's women, but it's Black women. So, one big takeaway there is, regardless of whether it's a man session or she session, as you, Nicole, have termed this, Black people are getting hit the hardest. African Americans are getting hit the hardest. So in some sense, one lesson is that you have to center, to some degree, people of color in your policy responses. As an example, during the Great Recession, we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act under former President Obama, where $700 billion was invested in the American economy, primarily to create jobs. But that particular policy approach did not center race necessarily. And so what we saw was that although it may have been effective in an aggregate sense in terms of helping to bring down unemployment rate, it wasn't very effective in terms of what was happening in communities of color. So again, fast forwarding to today, I think that what needs to happen in terms of policy responses, particularly now, that we do have an administration that is amenable to policies, family-friendly policies, that race and gender really must be centered. Janelle Jones, who I cited earlier, who's the chief economist right now at the Department of Labor, coined the phrase Black women vote. And essentially what she meant by that was that if our federal and state governments center Black women in terms of thinking about equitable recovery, it can only serve everyone, because Black women and Latinas are the most marginalized. And so I think, just linking, if I'm comparing, the most recent, the Great Recession, to the current COVID-inspired cyclical downturn, that we have to include in our thinking in terms of policy approaches what is specifically happening to communities of color, and obviously to women as well. So.
Yeah, and I think now I'm nerding out. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act under Obama, when we did the analysis when I was at NYU, we knew right away that those jobs, even though there was billions being pumped into the economy because of labor market segmentation, they weren't going to go to Black and Latino communities and men. It didn't happen. And so even in this moment, thinking about, well, how do we correct for that? So we know we need job creation efforts, but what about efforts in sectors that have been hardest hit, where women are? Like, what might we do there? But then also thinking about care and knowing that was a really significant issue this time around. So not leaving that unaddressed. And so Matthias, I want to just turn to you. When I think about this globally, and we talk about the care crisis in the U.S., the fact that we don't have a robust care infrastructure, and we look at other developed countries, and we know that U.S. spends less than 1% of its GDP on care infrastructure, and then we talk about labor segmentation. So this is a global issue. So what lessons might the U.S. take around building robust care infrastructure for families? What lessons might we learn from other countries who are a bit further along in thinking about these kinds of public policies?
I think the one that's really unambiguous is the issue of childcare infrastructure, because just the lack of robust childcare options, especially for young children, is a big break on women's ability to participate. It's also a big problem for children's education, because we have other issues with unequal outcomes, socioeconomic differences in children's say achievements in schools, which also relate to inequality in access to childcare and preschool and high quality schooling later on. So I think that is something we can see from the data, that better childcare infrastructure gives you better outcomes for children and for parents. It gives you more equality in the labor market and generally outcomes that we like. On the side of employment protections, perhaps a more complicated issue, because there's always a tension between protecting existing employment and encouraging structural transformation from sectors that are declining versus sectors that are growing. So certainly in the crisis, we can see that employment protection was quite successful in making the initial impact smaller. The longer impact of that is a bit harder to assess. We have seen a quick recovery in the United States in terms of unemployment. We have not really seen that so much in terms of employment. And so understanding that better, I think, is an important challenge here that we still have.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And we have about 10 minutes left, and we have some questions that are coming through from the audience. So the question that we just got. So workers are really demanding better jobs right now, barring low wage employer improving in any significant ways, meaning employers are not going to respond. But I actually think that they're going to have to respond in some way. Where are we seeing some success in terms of low wage jobs, or women who are in low wage jobs making it to better jobs? Are we seeing any progress there? Or is it too soon? I think maybe it's too soon. There's just so much movement right now, and we really can't tell. But
I mean, we do see. I mean, look, I can drive, driven around my state of Michigan, and actually through other states as I traveled this year between Michigan and Massachusetts. And, I see fast food restaurants offering $15 minimum wages or starting wages. I see a lot of places that, we're paying much less that are advertising higher wages. I think, though, before in the 2008 recession, education and health service jobs continued to grow, even as everybody else was shedding workers. And, I remember the labor secretary at the time asked me, "Oh, is this just a recession-proof industry?" And I said, "No, it's just an industry with such a strong upward trajectory in terms of jobs that the upward trajectory is stronger than the recession." The pandemic recession, that wasn't true. We saw jobs lost in education and health services, but the truth is they're going to keep growing because we're an aging population, we're a high income population, and people want to spend on their care. And a lot of those caregivers are women of color. So if you come back to Michelle Holder's point, if we figure out how to get better pay and better working conditions into positions like home healthcare workers, childcare workers, that's going to be helping, women of color, helping lower wage women, and then also helping all the workers in the economy by providing a care infrastructure that allows them to focus on their job. So I think we're starting to see improvements there from market conditions, but we can't get all the way there with just market conditions improving.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I do think that, we've all driven by signs that say $15 starting wage for some of these jobs. But, for me, wages are only a part of the conversation. The benefits are really critically important, like paid sick and family leave, flexibility, job security, so we have a long way to go to making some of these jobs quality jobs. And I think, some of the stuff that's happening in the reconciliation bill around care and strengthening that workforce is really important. But thinking broadly, what in terms of benefits and these other things, healthcare, health insurance. What I would like to see on one of these billboards is like higher wages and benefits and healthcare, or something like tell me everything else that's going on. The wage is not enough. We learned that benefits matter, especially health insurance during this downturn.
Here's one thing that Nicole, I just wanted to jump in to say, we have watched employers treat workers as disposable for so long, and workers are now treating those jobs as disposable. So they're getting a little bit of a taste of their own medicine, and we're going to see how they react.
Yeah, and they are disposable. I mean, these jobs are, were horrible to begin with, especially when we look at all the hardest hit sectors. These were not good jobs, but they were also really grueling jobs, for workers. And so I'm optimistic, hopefully, that we are seeing some changes, some rebalancing, but also there's a federal state level response as well in terms of public policy. I know we have about 5 more minutes. But I want to talk, just ask as we wrap up, each of you. So we've talked about this idea, people call it the great resignation happening, but I've been reframing and thinking about it as the great renegotiation. Like we're in a moment of renegotiation. So I want to hear from each of you, in your opinion, what is the future of work in this moment, and what are you most optimistic about?
Nicole, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here because I was actually chomping at the bit in terms of your conversation with Betsy, but this lends itself to it. So, there was a recent quote by a UAW worker that really resonated with me, and I caught it on one of the Sunday morning news shows. And he basically said that we're now in a period where the low wage jobs bubble has burst. And so I thought that was such a great way to codify it. Whether that is really the case or not, right, remains to be seen. But I think we are in this period where workers are reasserting themselves. It's unfortunate that we had this massive health crisis that has led to this reckoning between workers and employers. But I do think we are in this interesting period where workers are, they are able to better negotiate, better pay, and precisely because it was a healthcare crisis, workers are saying we also need better working conditions. We need to be safe at our jobs. We need to have paid sick leave. So just as you said, Nicole, it's not just about wages, it's also wages and benefits and working conditions. But because I'm a labor economist, let me just say in terms of wages, I am gratified to see that wages are on apparently during this period on the incline, because, I have to say I've written a bit about the gender wage gap, particularly as it relates to women of color. And so, when we're talking about the fact that women are underpaid in this country, about 80 cents to the dollar for men, when we're looking at Black women, that now drops to 60 cents to the dollar. So we're really talking about a loss of resources writ large to Black and Brown communities because women of color are underpaid. And I actually quantified it to the tune of about, where you look at Black women are underpaid, conservatively speaking, in this country to the tune of about $50 billion per year. That's a paper I did last year. So that's what I have to say in regard to your question.
So on the future of work, I think another issue that's really on my mind is work flexibility. We have had many more people working from home. It has been a big part of the pandemic experience. And there is really potential in that because it makes life a lot easier. I certainly enjoy the flexibility of working from home. Some of the time it makes life easier for parents. But there's also a downside to that, because if you work from home, then you have less separation between work and life. And we do, I think, have to some extent also pandemic fatigue, that people have been doing everything together, childcare, work, their private life, and come to a breaking point where they can't just keep on going in the same way. So having both flexibility, but using it in the work that actually makes sense for families, that's a challenge that I think we still have to fully address. There is a risk, I think, that having a more flexible workplace could actually be a more gender unequal workplace if you come to a situation where the men decide all to work in the office and make the big decisions, whereas the moms are using flexibility to do childcare at the same time and don't get the same benefits. So I think there is sort of potential in having more flexible workplace, but making it really work for women and for men and for families in the right way. That's a challenge that will take, I think, interventions both from policy and from smart decisions by employers.
So we are running out of time, so I'll just say quickly that, I agree to the point that you made earlier that we're in a great renegotiation, and we've learned that there are power in numbers. So as we have collectively come together as a nation who's decided, for many of us, that we don't want those bad working conditions anymore, that we don't want to not see our children, fathers who have said, I became more satisfied with the time I had with my kids in the pandemic, and I don't want to give that up. As men and women, mothers and fathers have all come together and said, I'm not going back to work unless I'm offered more, we see that they're able to get more. So I hope that we use this moment to learn the power of uniting as workers to be able to strike a better working conditions.
And on that note, which I think is a great note, I do think we're in a moment, and I'm glad that we're all a part of it and doing our respective work to make better public policies, but also raise issues of import to women of color, families, and how we might create a more equitable and just economy that works for everyone and not just a few. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matushka, who will transition us into the next panel.
Thanks, Nicole. So like you said, I'd like to thank panel one for sharing all of their rich insights and their expertise, as well as thanking you, Nicole, for getting us through that. We will now take a 10-minute break, and our session will resume promptly at 12:05 Eastern. Welcome back, everyone. We've had a great start to today with some very lively discussion. So let's just keep going. And to kick off the second half of today's program, I would now like to introduce Tammy Edward, Senior Vice President at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Tammy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and welcome to you all to Panel 2, How to Create an Inclusive Recovery for Mothers. I join my colleague, Alfreda Norman, in thanking you for joining us today to discuss this very important topic on creating a more equitable economy for women. During today's first panel, you may have heard the term she-cession for the first time, a term coined by Dr. Nicole Mason, who moderated the session. Unlike previous recessions, the pandemic recession affected women more than men. This was especially the case for women without college degrees and women of color. The panelists provided an overview of the pandemic-related economic declines women are facing and their ability to equally participate in the post-recession labor market. This next panel on how to create an inclusive recovery for mothers will explore the economic impacts the pandemic is having on mothers and ideas on how to rebuild a more inclusive economy where all can contribute and benefit. The pandemic worsened barriers to economic participation for women, especially childcare barriers. Due to widespread loss of childcare options, remote learning, and uneven abilities to work from home, many mothers struggled to both work and attend to their children. Tough decisions often led to mothers not working, which caused financial hardships. Last year, the Federal Reserve found that 43% of women between the ages of 25 and 54 who were not working, cited childcare and family obligations as the reasons why they were not working. And 63% of mothers who were not working or working less due to childcare disruptions reported that they would not be able to pay all of their bills if faced with a $400 emergency expense. To achieve an inclusive recovery, it is important to recognize the employment barriers that many mothers face, how barriers differ by race and income, and how to overcome them. Our esteemed panelists will address many policies, but they will focus on access to childcare, which is currently a leading barrier to employment, especially for lower income mothers. So let's get started. I am honored to introduce the moderator for this panel, Dr. Lauren Bauer. Dr. Bauer is a fellow in the economic studies at the Brookings Institution and is associated with the Hamilton Project, a platform for leading economic thinkers to introduce innovative and programmatic policy options into the national debate. Her research focuses on social and safety net policies, including federal nutrition assistance programs and education. Dr. Bauer, thank you for being with us today.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much to the Kansas City and Dallas Feds for having us and to my panelists for what I know will be an exciting discussion. So this panel is going to tackle how to create an inclusive recovery for mothers. From the outset of the pandemic, mothers faced pressure to do it all. At this very moment, Congress and the Biden administration are in negotiations over which investments and policies will be authorized to support families, the economy, and a self-sustaining recovery. Our goal here is to explain why we need to focus special attention on mothers and what policies support mothers' labor force participation and economic security. I'm going to very quickly set the stage with some facts about mothers and their work over the past 20 months. Then I'll turn to our excellent panelists so that they can share their expertise. Finally, we'll discuss what has happened in policy since March of 2020 and what the future may bring. We'll have too much to cover, so please ask questions so that I can get to what you want to hear about. As the prior panel and this figure show, millions of women lost their jobs during this recession, more than men, and are trying but struggling to re-engage. Mothers felt pressure to leave their jobs as schools and childcare facilities closed. I found in a survey I ran of mothers of young children that more than 1 in 10 said that they left their job at some point in 2020 due to caregiving responsibility. These effects are lingering and still constraining As of last month, more than 4 million people said that they weren't working because they were caring for children. For the mothers who held on to their jobs or who have gone back to work, they've had to juggle all these competing responsibilities and demands on their time. Next slide. Caregiving responsibilities have intensified over the past 20 months. This figure shows no difference in labor force participation rates for fathers by child age, but that's not true for women. Child age has mattered before the pandemic, throughout, and still. Next slide. This figure shows labor force participation rates for fathers by marital status. Marital status, but not child age, matters for men. Next slide. This figure shows labor force participation rates for mothers by marital status. I think it's fair to say that caregiving matters. In some of my research, we found that declining labor force participation among mothers was caused not only by the recession, but also by elementary school closures. I will also note that unmarried mothers with children had the highest labor force participation rates prior to the pandemic, bore the brunt of the service sector-led recession, are particularly vulnerable to economic shocks, and shouldered the loss of schools and childcare and the demands of social distancing with fewer built-in supports. Next slide. Finally, I want to talk about how mothers spent their time. Only focusing on LFPR misses a material part of the story. Mothers who held on to their jobs struggled to balance competing demands on their time and spent more time on non-market labor and with their kids than working. Indeed, some research suggests that it's mothers who could work from home who are most likely to leave their jobs. Boundaries are important. In the past 20 months, mothers of children 12 and under were less likely to be employed and working, more likely to be unemployed, less likely to be working full-time hours, more likely to have dropped out of the labor force, and more likely to be spending a substantial amount of time caring for children, whether working or not. But this crisis exposed and amplified what had long been untenable. And this could be the moment where policymakers put into place key workplace flexibilities and supports to change the slope of the recovery for mothers. I'd now like to turn to Dr. Elizabeth Cassio, who is going to dig deeper into what's been happening to moms of younger children.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So I'm actually going to start by thinking about elementary school kids and mothers. So I want to pick up on that theme. At best, it's very difficult for mothers of children under the age of 12 to engage in the formal labor market without childcare. So even though teachers don't like to think of themselves as babysitters, a critical social function and social benefit of public education is that it does provide childcare. The pandemic has really laid this bare. Families depend on schools for adult supervision of their children during the workday, and there's no backup plan if both parent or a single parent works. Widespread school closures at the end of the 2019-20 school year and continuing hybrid and virtual learning models in the last year left parents and especially mothers of elementary school age children hustling to meet the educational needs of their children while also trying to work or just giving up on the work part, as we've heard. So an interesting question is why we haven't seen as dramatic of a decline in the employment of mothers of younger children, say children under the age of 5. I would argue that this is because the child care system, and I think it's kind of generous to call what we have in the United States a system, was already not serving mothers well before the pandemic. So because of our politics and our history, not because it has any strong economic rationale, there's historically been a very sharp distinction between how we approach the education and care of children ages 4 and younger and the education and care of children 5 and older. So whereas kindergarten has historically been free and accessible across the country, early childhood education and care, or ECE, has not been. Please advance to the next slide, slide 2. There is limited direct public provision, for example, through Head Start or state-funded pre-K programs, very limited subsidies for families to offset the costs of private care and education. And those costs are very high, both in terms of prices to enroll a child in a child care center or in preschool, and because there can be long distances to providers. So one consequence, as you see here in this slide, is that the US ranks second to last among OECD countries in the share of 4-year-olds enrolled in pre-primary education at 64%. This is between Mexico and Turkey. Slide 3. Another consequence seen here is that school enrollment at this age before the pandemic favored families more likely to have the ability to pay. So 4-year-olds in lower income families, Latino children, and children whose parents do not have a college education are all less likely to attend. Slide 4, enrollment rates are lower and gaps are often larger at age 3. So this is not to say that the pandemic did not make the situation worse, as we know it did. Slide 5. The data I used in the previous 2 graphs, it hasn't been released yet for 2020 by the federal government, but we can learn something about what happened to early education and childcare participation from cell phone tracking. So as shown here, there was a steep drop-off in visits to ECE providers relative to pre-pandemic norms in March through June of 2020, as many centers closed despite states allowing them to remain open, at least for the children of essential workers. This reflects the fact that demand for childcare fell as well due to job loss and income loss in families. More recently, though, the constraints have more likely been on the supply side, owing to guidance or regulations surrounding safe operating conditions and difficulty in finding staff at the wages that centers are able to pay and charge prices that families are able to pay or still struggle to pay. Visits to ECE providers also remain below where they were before the pandemic this past June, which I have highlighted the latest date in the data that I have. Slide 6. The final thing I'll say is that visits to providers remain down by more in neighborhoods with higher populations of color, but there's a great deal of heterogeneity across the country in what this looks like. So this map shows the Latino, non-Latino gap in exposures to centers operating at 50% or lower capacity. So bigger numbers here mean more exposure essentially to center closures or cutbacks relative to before the pandemic. Darker shading, yes, means a bigger gap. And so, we see that was the case for Latino children across the country. It was especially bad in the Northeast. Slide 7. And here you see the same for the Black, non-Black gap. So to sum up, childcare availability and affordability matters for whether mothers can work. Before the pandemic, the labor force participation rates of mothers of young children, especially, were arguably too low or inefficiently low from an economic perspective due to a variety of market failures that plague childcare in the United States. And on top of that, childcare has become even more difficult for families to access and pay for over the last 20 months. So I look forward to speaking more about what might be done about this situation using funds that have become available and that may become available through the budget reconciliation bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
I'm going to speak. Introduce Patricia.
Thanks, Liz. So we're now going to hear from Patricia Cortez, who's going to speak to some of the circumstances that have changed for mothers with higher education as well as immigrant communities.
Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And as Lauren said, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk about first gender gaps in earnings, not labor force participation, and second, talk more about the situation for high school mothers, those with at least a college degree. So despite very large accomplishments, especially in education in the last decades for women, now women are more likely to go to college and graduate from college than men. Still the case that very large gender gaps in earnings, even in hourly wages, persist. And this persistence has been particularly starking for high school women. Like in the last 20, 30 years, the gender gap has not bulged. And because of this, there's been a lot of research trying to explain why is that so difficult for high school women to reach their counterparts, men. And I think it's fair to say that the literature has found that the main explanation is how parenthood affect differently the careers of men and women. Can you show the graph, please? And this is what we called, and this is a very economist name, that is the child penalty. And what we have here is when you think about couples, And we want to follow couples over time in their labor earnings before they have a kid and after they have a kid. So the sample is restricted to would-be parents. And here you can see the first childbirth is our event. And we're going to compare how the careers of men and women evolved over time. So what you see here is before the first child, men's and women's careers are pretty much similar in terms of their trends. Women are likely earning less, but in terms of growth, they're very similar. Now, as the first kid is born, and you can interpret this graph as relative to the potential without a kid, what you observe is that fathers' careers are just not affected. They stayed pretty flat. Whereas mothers' careers see a big drop in their earnings. And not only that, this big drop in earnings persist over time, such that 10 years after having their first kid, women are earning 40% or 30% less than their potential. Now, what is interesting, and of course, we know that having a kid is time demand a lot of time and investment. So it's not a surprise that someone in the household has to reduce their hours work. What is less obvious, though, is that it has to be the woman. And in work I have with Jessica Pan, we find that a pattern that you see in this graph is also true in couples in which the woman has more income potential or has a relative higher education. So it is kind of puzzling. Why is that it's so persistent even in this group of couples? In other work that I have with Jose Tesa and Jessica Pan, we actually showed this hypothesis that high-skilled women are also constrained by household demands. How we do this is that we use an exogenous shock to this constraint that relaxes this constraint. There's going to be low-skilled immigrants. So low-skilled immigrants tend to work in occupations that are a substitute for household production. And what we find is, as in cities, when there's a big inflow of low-skilled immigrants, this allows very high-skilled women with a master's degree or a professional degree, a PhD, to increase the number of hours. And what that leads in some occupations, in which there are very large returns to working long hours, in occupations where to make it to the top, you have to work 60, 80 hours in very inflexible schedules. We find that in those occupations, in those cities in where lots of immigrant comes, actually women can switch to jobs that they can work very long hours, and they can, and that actually reduces the gender gap and at the top of the skill distribution. We also find that actually women that don't have children yet, but know that because of the availability of the service, they will be able to gain all of the returns of choosing the occupations. We see them more likely to choose occupations in the corporate sector, or become lawyers, or go to academia. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating for a huge immigrant inflow to solve all of our childcare problems. This is just to show that even high-skilled women are constraining their labor outcomes by household demands. Now, when we think about what can we make, what can we do, what policies could help, is actually complicated, because I think that probably the main reason why we see this, even at the very high scale for high-skilled mothers, is the unequal distribution of household work in the household. And behind this, I think what we observe, what's driving this is very traditional gender roles that are very difficult to change. Now, potentially a policy that have shown some promise is paternal leave. If there have been shown that if we allow fathers, or give the opportunity to fathers to spend more time with the babies, they can potentially live in the longer round, in the longer term for like more equal distribution. Okay, now I'm going to pass the microphone, so to speak, to Catherine.
Thank you so much. So I am here to round it off and talk about what we need to do to create an economic recovery for mothers from this pandemic. And I think what you get from the past two speakers is, we have a question about our labor market that we need to answer, which is, if you are a working mother, are you the exception or are you the rule? Are you trying to try to bend the labor market so it fits with the demands of being a mom, of being a caregiver, and being a worker, or does the labor market bend to you? So we saw from Elizabeth's presentation that it is very difficult to access childcare for many women. And we know from Patricia's presentation that it doesn't matter if you are incredibly high income and incredibly high earnings, having a child changes your potential earnings in the way that you interact with the labor market. So what I'd like to talk about before we get into the question and answers is, is that required? Does it have to be the case that women will always be different as soon as they have a kid? I think on some level, yes. But we can learn from progress in other countries as to what we can do to make it easier, to make an economy that doesn't make women feel like they have to move so many mountains just to hold a job. So in, say, late 80s, around the time that I was born, so if you go back in time, the United States, if we looked at prime age workers, which are workers that are kind of after the period in which we expect them to get to college, so think around age 25, but before they might start to retire, so around age 55. If you were to look at women 25 to 55 years old in comparable countries to the US, so this would have been, not the communist countries, not necessarily Asian economies, but large industrialized Western economies, the US was a leader in women's labor force participation. So it was kind of it was the 4 Scandinavian countries, which have just a very different social welfare system than the rest of the world. And then the US and Canada about tied, and then kind of all these other countries like most of Western Europe, they're all behind us, Australia and New Zealand. In the 20 years since, at around 2010, if you go back and look and see how US women have progressed, we're basically frozen in time. We've made almost no progress in the share of women of a prime age who are working since then. Whereas the countries that were behind us have moved leaps and bounds ahead of us. They've passed us to an incredible degree. So where we used to be around 5th or 6th, we're now around 18th, 17th, 18th, 19th. And rather than being near Canada, Germany, France, or the United Kingdom, we're now around Italy and Greece in terms of women working. So I don't think it's fair to say that there is something wrong with American women. And it might be that there is something wrong with the American labor market and how it treats mothers. What those other countries who passed us did in that time period is that they enacted a lot of laws that supported women working. So they have paid family leave, which the United States does not. They have investments in childcare, which, as Elizabeth noted, the US, our investments in childcare really round down to 0. And in other countries, it's a massive investment. But what they also noted, and what the other panel kind of hinted at earlier this morning, was that many of these countries have right to work laws for flexible arrangements. So after you work at a company in the United Kingdom for 6 months, for example, you can make a request for flexibility, changing your hours, changing your work schedule, or changing your ability to work from home. And this is not something that happened in response to the pandemic. The United Kingdom has had this law for 35 years, right? These are not new laws. These are laws that they've had for a long time. And coupled with this right to work part-time and this right to flexibility, they also have basic employer discrimination protection against workers who choose to work part-time. Now, how effective it is I think more debatable, but they have established the right that you can work at a company, request to go part-time, and you're legally not meant to be discriminated against in something like promotion or in your ability to be laid off because you are part-time. Now, in the US, that would be a rather revolutionary concept, considering that our part-time access to part-time work is very much concentrated at the bottom of the wage distribution. In the United States, fewer than half of part-time workers have paid sick leave, fewer than half of part-time workers have paid holidays, and only 10% have access to any paid leave at all. So when we think about the options for moms in a labor market, we're basically pushing them into, you either have to give it your all and go full-time, or kind of settle for a part-time work that has very low remuneration and might not be worth the childcare investment. So as we think about a recovery going forward, we shouldn't just think about what are the institutional barriers for women in terms of childcare. We should also think about what are the labor market regulations that would benefit them and their ability to carve out a role in the labor market that can make it work, where we can actually do it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'm going to switch to Q&A, but I'd love to just sort of summarize what I think I heard about sort of how we got to this moment. And I think that there was pretty consistent evidence across all three of you that things were not great before. You know, as Liz noted, one of the reasons we didn't see, you know, a huge drop off in labor force participation for mothers of younger children is because that sector and their choices were already constrained. And so it's not surprising that me and my co-authors found that the big issue was for elementary school age moms, because, you know, we were pretty universal there in terms of childcare. And then when you lose it, boy, that's consequential for you. And, you know, in terms of leave policies and even just the take up of policies that exist, like paternity leave. I mean, my God, it's been in the news the past month about you know, whether or not a cabinet secretary who had a child is allowed to take the leave that is rightfully his. And, you know, issues of discrimination, whether it's pregnancy discrimination, or, you know, the long tail end of a century of discrimination against mothers and married women, I think still matters here. And so we were coming into this recession where women had made unbelievable strides in their labor force participation, in their independence and economic security, with very substantial caveats. And then this hit. And so, you know, as part of what happened with COVID is the fiscal response was really substantial. And so I'd love to just sort of round robin for a little bit and talk through, you know, what problems for mothers did policy try to solve over the past 20 months, and how successful or not were they? And I would love to start with Liz, because I think obviously school closures and, you know, what has happened with the childcare sector all around is just so important to getting an equitable recovery for moms with kids.
Thanks, Lauren. I think so. I think there was maybe about 39 billion in the American Rescue Plan Act that was earmarked for childcare. My understanding is that those funds are kind of, you know, still kind of getting out there right now into the sector. There are kind of a number of ways in which they could be spent to support the situation. I mean, one would be to just try to make it possible for centers to stay open. So, you know, the price of childcare becomes infinite if there's no childcare center available to you. Now, the economics of childcare is really complicated. Because, you know, people think, why is it so expensive for my, you know, to send a child to childcare? And it doesn't seem to jive with, but childcare workers aren't paid that much. You know, you're sort of lucky to make much above the minimum wage if you work in the childcare sector. But the reality of it is, given regulations and ratios, right, sort of children to providers, it's you know, it does work out so that the prices that childcare centers must charge are kind of the prices that they need just to stay afloat. And it just sort of really reveals kind of the challenge. A huge challenge here is that, you know, we want to sort of have higher quality in these centers by reducing turnover, which involves potentially paying people more for, you know, what they're doing and valuing that work as well. By the way, many of the caregivers, essentially all the caregivers in this sector are women themselves, right, who are affected by this. At the same time, you know, raising those wages takes childcare even further out of reach for families. So this is absolutely a place where it is sensible to think about a government role or a larger government role like exists in other countries. So I bet in terms of what's actually happened during the pandemic with that funding, I mean, we don't even really know what's happened to participation. So it's
no, I
very
know.
hard to
And
say.
there's a lag here. And so I think,
Yeah.
you know, the idea of, you know, your heart being in the right place and money being there, but not knowing from a state's perspective how to spend it. Is it too soon to spend it? Like, are we just going to burn it if, you know, it goes out to the centers and they're just closed? So I can imagine that be a problem. So, you know, bringing that forward to the current policy debate, you know, they're trying to make priorities, and it sounds like they're prioritizing expanding universal pre-K over and putting more money in childcare. And I know that you've written many policy proposals, including for the Hamilton Project, on how to scale up both pre-K and childcare. And so I was just wanting to get your thoughts in this moment where they seem to be weighing the two against each other in ways that, you know, I don't think I would want them to do, about, you know, what's the right move.
I mean, it makes me nervous. I mean, I think these two policies kind of should move together for the following reason. So when we sort of take kids, it's not necessarily taking them out of childcare, because I think to expand to universal pre-K, you know, you would need in many states to have a model where you're having cooperative agreements with childcare centers, private centers, to provide this service. The risk here is that the economics of these private centers is such that when you know, you charge more for infant care than for care of toddlers or preschool age children, but the true cost differences are much greater. So centers are cross-subsidizing the care of younger children with the care of older children. So the older children are relatively more profitable for centers. If the way the policy is implemented kind of takes that option away from providers, that could be, you know, very damaging for the care of very young, much younger children. Would sort of make it much more expensive, or prices that would need to be charged would have to be much higher. So that's, you know, that is a really important issue here to be thinking about. But you did, you know, and on the other hand, it's exciting in the sense that, as you saw from my presentation, enrollment rates of 3- and 4-year-olds are pretty low in this country relative to what they are in the rest of the country or the world, and what they could possibly be.
Thank you. So Patricia, you spoke about, you know, how women with more skill and education sort of make it work, and how that relates to how other women make it work. And you raised paternity leave as, you know, one of the policy options that is empowering and, you know, creates a more equitable thing. And I would love for you to speak to the question, why, like, childless men should care about any of this, and what fathers' responsibilities are toward their wives and children. I know certainly, you know, we have seen, you know, in the time use data, like, you know, some men are stepping up and they are doing more secondary childcare. They are doing some more direct childcare, not to the degree at all that mothers are. But, you know, maybe we're seeing baby steps toward something there, and maybe their desire for flexibility, the same way that mothers have always desired and needed flexibility in order to remain attached, have been. So would you be willing to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So let me start with your first question. Why does both men and women without children should care? And I think there's a selfish reason to care, and I think it's that when you think about the talent distribution, right, the potential distribution, I think most of us will agree that it's pretty equal for men and women, right? And as it is right now, right, men and women are not reaching their full potential because of this constraint to their potential, being it like traditional gender norms that let them like to take out disproportionately their household work, etc. And, you know, compared to the past, for example, where gender norms were even stronger and where most women were nurses and teachers, right? We're missing a lot. We're missing a lot of what we have today as brilliant doctors or scientists, or in many other occupations, right? And there's still a long way to go of, being a more optimal allocation of talent in the economy. And I'm sure if every woman can lead to their full potential, right, then the country will grow much faster and we will all be better off. That's that part. Even if you never think about having children and you just think about, your own, I think you will be better off. Now, when we think about fathers, it's interesting because I think these paternity leaves can work, but they're not that obvious to make them work. I think there's, like in some Scandinavian countries, they have actually, at first, I think they were offering, parental leave, and they can distribute it however they wanted to. And what you see is that most of it was taken by women, right? Even if men, could, even if women were making more, in most cases, women will take it. So actually what they do is that they allocated a portion of the parental leave to have to be taken by the father or lose it, right? And in those cases, they will take it, but they won't take more, right? And then there's the interesting case of the East Asian countries where actually some of them have very generous paternity leaves and they just don't take it, right? And the reason is that it's traditional gender norms. We don't know much about this because it's pretty relatively new, but it might be that there's such a stigma or there's actually quite a heavy cost for men to take it in these very traditional settings, right? So it's quite a complicated thing, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
That's right. And it's certainly something where, this is a group of economists and empiricists, and culture is a pretty important factor in all of this. And policy is not going to resolve the problem of men not thinking they should do something or being criticized publicly constantly or by your supervisor for taking what's yours. And this is one of the places where men, take it on the chin the way women constantly do if they have to, do something flexible to take care of their
you
kids.
saw it with all of the comments for Pete with the eggs, like taking the paternity leave.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is a father going to do the whole month where he's there, right? Just
how dare he? He just had twins. They take care of themselves.
I think it's
going in the right direction, but it's going to take time. That said, gender norms have changed over time, and there's some research that shows that, men that have working mothers are more liberal and tend to, and so I think that we're changing in that direction, but still quite a long way to go.
Catherine, you were saying?
Yeah, I was going to say that culture is also malleable. Like it's a barrier that I think is it's a shapeshifter. It's not always clear, when or how it's going to strike, but it does change over time. I mean, I remember my mom telling me, she's an attorney. She works for Children's Protective Services, and people would tell her when she was going to work that she was ruining her children, and I think I'm okay. Like I wouldn't say, amazing, but I turned out fine. But for her, I mean, she said it was absolutely a part of her work experience to have to justify, the damage she was doing to her children by not being home. And that was part of the culture at the time, was this kind of assignation that, if you choose work, that first that you're making a choice about work over kids, and that second, your kids are going to be so much worse. And now we don't really see that at all. We kind of see that there's just this demand for women to be able to get income for their families that is not being met by the US labor market. And now the question is, why is the labor market performing so poorly relative to its potential, and not like, so what's up with these women? It's a very different kind of cultural discussion that we're having today. And so culture is malleable. I mean, even among, dads in 20 years, I mean, we don't know what they would say about paternity leave relative to what they're saying today.
That's right. This is my moment to plug Claudia Golden's new book, Career and Families, which, develops the history of these choices back and forth between kids first, career first, same together. It's really excellent. And if you like this discussion, you're really gonna like that book. So Catherine, you were already sort of going on the road I'd love to talk about, which is like really thinking about the future of work here, which is how the last panel ended. What shifts in preferences have you seen over, the past 20 months about, what people want from jobs? We've seen a lot of quits. We've seen a lot of industry switching. I would recommend Betsy Stevenson's paper for the Hamilton Project on this, which is a pretty up-to-the-date assessment of all of the different ways that women have been behaving differently in the labor market over the past 2 years, and how does that relate to current policy discussions about like what are the most important pieces that the federal government can put the thumb on the scale of saying, if we want to have a revitalized and accelerating, labor market following this crisis, what can we do to help these jobs be better?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question on so many people's minds right now. Where are the workers, right? We have over 10 million job openings. Our unemployment rate is down, but so is our labor force participation, and people have not really come back from the pandemic. So I think it's important to say, first and foremost, that the economy will not recover until the pandemic is contained. And that the most important economic policy in the world right now is getting people vaccinated. And most importantly for moms is getting their kids vaccinated and making school a place that is safe and reliable like it was before the pandemic. And I think if you ask anyone who has a kid in childcare or school right now, safe and reliable would not be near the top of the list of what school is, given quarantine exposures, given having to go home for 5 to 10 days. Your kid has a fever, he can't go near the school for a week, right? It's so hard to have a reliability that we're used to. And so we have to put vaccination at the top of the list. But, failing that or beyond that, what is the labor market recovery going to look like that draws workers back? I think, to what I was saying in my presentation, we have a part-time labor market that is not functioning for a lot of people. When other countries took the move to make their part-time, to make their full-time labor market start to yield, like bend towards part-time, to give people the option of how they access their jobs, our part-time labor market has become, less and less in control of the workers. So we have something in the US called just-in-time scheduling. And we have kind of a shift scheduling model where people are required, in order to keep their job, say 12 hours open for a shift that they might get 0 to 4 hours of. And we also have the concept of clopening, where you are required to close a store and then open it. So in between opening and closing, you actually have 6 hours. So, kind of to Liz's point, talking about childcare deserts, every single zip code in the United States is a childcare desert by 6 p.m. And if you have a job that requires you to work until 2 a.m., it doesn't matter if there's 6 daycare centers next to the restaurant where you work, they're not open when you're working. And so the questions we need to have about how people offer work and how people, regulate the labor market is, who is actually physically capable of taking that job? And is it a mom? The question I would have for, Congress and labor regulators going forward is, what is the minimum wage? What is the benefit schedule? And what is the work schedule? Because you cannot work and caregive at the same time. And that's all there is to it. You can't do both at the same time. Maybe we could the first month of the pandemic when we were all lying about actually working, but you can't, it's not a job. It's not a full-time career. And so that's the question is what kind of, we talk so much about the care side, but the labor market side is just as important of what kind of jobs are we producing. And if it's a job that pays $2.13 an hour, which is the tipped minimum wage, and only happens between 7 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning, who do we think is actually going to take it, and can that support a family?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I'm going to switch to audience questions because I elicited that. And it would be rude not to. So one of the audience questions is, I love the idea of having a customizable work experience for flexibility, part-time, or work from home options. That said, what about looking at full-time status with benefits and having less hours? So not lowering your pay rate, but being able to work less. Is that something that is part of the conversation and certainly relates to, eligibility for UI and all sorts of other downstream potential consequences if we are just sort of lowering our expectations for full-time?
So I'll jump in and say that people in the US work a lot. We have pretty long hours relative to other countries, and our full-time workers are working time and a half relative to a lot of other countries. There's like one kind of policy solution that exists that we don't like to use too often. And then there's just a question of culture and what becomes the norm at offices. Who is there at 6? If it's everybody, right, that's a hard culture to change. But if it's just, the like older men whose kids are in college, right, that's a different culture to change. The US does have wage and hour rules that say if once you work 40 hours in a work week, you are then entitled to time and a half, which puts a great incentive on the employer to make sure that no one works more than 40 hours in a week. But the income cutoff for which you would have been classified as an hourly versus salaried worker, in which these wage and hour rules do not apply, has eroded tremendously over time. So the share of the workforce it used to cover, it really was the people who were exempt from being covered by the wage and hour rules were basically managers, right? So if you were in a restaurant, for example, none of the floor staff would be exempt, but passively the owner or the manager was. This concept of exemption has basically fallen in terms of the level of jobs that it applies to, as well as the income that it applies to. And so we kind of eroded this concept of making employers cap work at 40 hours. We started to walk away from that in the 70s, and we let those protections slide incredibly. So there's a culture change, there's a worker empowerment change, but there's also a regulatory change that we could, if the Department of Labor was willing, raise those income cutoffs for exemption and really claw back what share of the labor market is not allowed to work more than 40 hours.
Thank you. So the next question is, what percentage of the labor force is comprised of women with young children? Could the macroeconomic effects of their being in or out of the labor force be outsized? I will take that one. The answer is about 9%. And so we do not think that all of what we've talked about here in terms of the outsized effect on women is affecting aggregate employment, because it's a small group, and the group that has actually been affected here is even smaller than that, because many women, by choice or by necessity, have held on or come back. And I think you saw from my slides and from Betsy's slides, they are trying really hard to come back. They are switching industries, they are switching jobs, they are going for it here, and it's not good. But the inverse is also true, which is, what happened to women did cause them to leave, and is going to make it harder for them to come back. And I would focally address the issues of unmarried mothers, single mothers, mothers living partners, etc., because it was just a confluence of circumstances. They were, disproportionately employed in the service sector, which disproportionately got hit. And so when we're talking about the she-cession, we're really talking about single moms. And, if they were following the guidelines about social distancing and care, who's going to care for their kids? What are they going to do? And so they were the most employed before, and they're having the hardest time coming back. And so any of the policy solutions that we're talking about here really need to center them for themselves, their economic security, and their kids. Go ahead, Catherine.
Lauren, if I could just butt in real quick.
Please.
I think it's important to keep in mind when we're having this discussion that the United States economy is very much predicted by the number of people working. Right? The per worker GDP is relatively constant in the United States. Our economy is a function of our labor force participation. So while any one group might seem small, a 3% hit to labor force participation is devastating for our economy overall. And so the question Patricia got earlier was, why should a childless man care about this? Why should he care about childcare or flexible work hours or any of these things? And I think it's because there's an economic stake in pulling people into the labor force that we all benefit from. And that's not abstract. That's not like a feeling we have when we know that women can access jobs the same way. I mean, it is a cold, hard calculus. I could hate children, I could hate women, but I'm better off if they are working because my economy is stronger. We are in a recovery. Our economy has shrunk in recession. Now is the time to think, what are we not utilizing that we have in our arsenal? And that is the labor force participation of women with young children. They are clipped at every turn. And so that's what's at stake. It's not just women, it's not just children, it's our economic recovery.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Go ahead, Liz.
Can I add?
You have 5 minutes left, and Liz, you can take your closing statement starting now.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I mean, the labor force participation of women with young children or mothers of young children has been stagnant really for decades, and for some groups, it's declined, I believe. And so that's just an important consideration here. It's not just about the pandemic recovery. It's that. Go ahead, Lauren.
No, I was gonna go. You finish.
Okay. So it's just like there's money that we've been leaving on the table for decades here. And sort of to turn back to some things that Patricia said, and I believe the graph that she showed about sort of showing the child penalty, women kind of leave the labor market, at least for an extended period of time, sometimes never returning after they have a child. Right, in part because we lack the supports in this country, right, to make it easy or easier to combine sort of the care responsibilities of mother, early motherhood with work. And so even when we're talking about, what happened during the pandemic for mothers of elementary school age children, they are not performing at the level that they could, in part because there is path dependence from what happens kind of right after a child is born. So, I mean, it's just sort of just a consideration that, that I feel like hasn't entered the discussion, but is important to think about going forward, kind of even absent the pandemic.
That's right. And I think that's an important part of this conversation that we have talked about is the disruption in career trajectories and what are the long-term consequences for that. And I think, Betsy spoke to it a little bit on the first panel, but, people changing their desire, like, not going after that promotion. I know plenty of people who are currently not interested in getting the promotion that they've deserved because they can't deal with it right now, right? Not investing in skills. I mean, we have, school was not a safe harbor here for people. And so they just weren't going back to school. They weren't going to community college. They weren't getting a credential while they waited out a bad labor market. That's going to have consequences, possibly more for men than women. At one time it's going to be true. But there are potential real disruptions here that are going to change people's career trajectories forever. And our goal is to try and create a policy environment that helps them get it back on track. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I just perhaps want to mention a silver lining of the pandemic, that at least for my high skill women might be good. And I think that this whole shock to the way we work in terms of being more, both people feeling more comfortable working from home, changing their preference, but also like firms learning that people can work from home can in the long term potentially benefit women who have a higher demand for this. And what was before the mommy track or stigma for, taking 2 days out of the week to work from home might become less costly. Now, of course, that only applies to the type of work that can be worked from home. But I think we still have to see how much of that persists over time. I think it's unclear now, but I think that's a potential silver lining.
I associate myself with those comments. Catherine, you have 1 minute.
I'll just close by saying that, nothing is fixed, right? There's no rule that says, no matter what we do, women will always stay home more, or women have to have a child penalty, or work has to be full-time 55 hours a week if you're going to make a decent income. All of this is subject to policy that we have the ability to manipulate. So the question isn't, just what's the crisis now, but the question is, where do we want to be in 10 years? Where do we want to be in 20 years? I'm sure my mom would have been shocked if she had learned that my daycare situation was a marginal improvement over hers with just as much like tears and heartache and money going out the door. We have the ability to make these changes and to kind of demand an economy through policy that meets workers where they are. I like to say when it comes to men and women in the labor market, you cannot accommodate your way to equality. Right? You can't just make women the exception and say, well, don't worry, if you have a kid, you're allowed to come late just one day a week, right? Like you have to give the flexibility to everybody and allow those preferences to lay out, because you can't accommodate your way to equality, but we can't have equality without the accommodation of mothers.
That's right. Thank you all. At this very moment on Capitol Hill, there is a Care Can't Wait rally. So, the different policy options that we've been discussing here about how to ensure that women are front and center to the recovery and for their well-being and the well-being of their families. It's happening right now. So if you have a desire to get engaged, please do. And with that, I will turn it over to Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City President and CEO Esther George. Thanks.
Well, thank you. This last conversation was terrific, and I want to thank all of our speakers and participants for today's very lively discussion at this latest installment of the Federal Reserve's Community Development Research Seminar, and to thank the team that partnered the Dallas and Kansas City Feds to sponsor this one. As I've listened here, the focus on women's labor force engagement is clearly an important issue as our economy recovers. And as someone said, that's true not only for women, but also for our economy as a whole. And so I want to close today's program with just a few thoughts on current labor market dynamics, and particularly focused on women. So unlike prior downturns, the pandemic has weighed more heavily on women than men. And we see that in the data. Women with less education, especially minorities, lost disproportionately more jobs and exited the labor force at higher rates during the recession. Mothers of young children have taken a harder hit than fathers, which stands in contrast to the experience we had during the previous Great Recession, when participation paths for mothers and fathers looked pretty similar. The lack of affordable childcare options and the lack of flexibility with work hours seem to be delaying return to the labor force for many women, and again, especially minorities. Let me step back to say, when the economy reopened in the summer of 2020, we did see a jump in the participation rate for prime age workers, both men and women. But since then, there has been little improvement, with the rate remaining almost 1.5 percentage points below its pre-pandemic level. But the largest and the most persistent decline in participation has been among women, and in particular, women without a college degree. Compared to the start of the pandemic, there are around 1.6 million fewer prime age workers in the labor force, including more than 1 million fewer women without a bachelor's degree. And among these women, Hispanic women, who had the lowest participation rate before the pandemic, are farthest from a full recovery, with a labor force participation rate some 8% below the pre-pandemic level. So where did these women go? Well, as you've already heard, one likely explanation is that school and daycare closures during the pandemic created challenges for many parents, but especially for those with young children. A lack of access to childcare, the demands of home and virtual schooling, and health concerns have kept many women with young children out of the labor force. And a substantial body of research shows that on average, working women shoulder more childcare responsibilities at home, even when they have a spouse present. So when children had to stay at home because of school and daycare closures, mothers often had to pick up the additional childcare responsibilities. The presence of young children has played an important role in the decline in non-college women's participation. At the onset of the pandemic, non-college educated mothers experienced a large drop in participation. And although participation in this group improved through the summer of last year, we saw it fall again with the start of the school year. Currently, only about 64% of these mothers of young children are participating in the labor force, which is almost 6% lower than pre-pandemic. In contrast, the participation rate of non-college educated women without young children declined less during the downturn and recovered more afterwards. Participation rates remain especially depressed among Black and Hispanic non-college educated women with young children, likely related again to the difficulties in accessing affordable childcare. Enrollment in childcare programs dropped substantially when the pandemic hit in 2020. Low enrollment and continuing health risks caused many childcare providers to simply shut down their businesses, especially those in low and middle income areas. As the economy reopened and the job market started to recover, anecdotal evidence suggests that many of these mothers found themselves struggling to find affordable childcare programs in their community. And temporary school closures, online schooling have also made it harder for mothers with school-aged children to return to work. The current low levels of participation among these women suggest that many mothers may not be able to sustainably return to work until children are consistently back in school and they have access to affordable childcare programs. The pandemic has also taken a toll on college-educated prime-age women, with participation among this group remaining almost a percentage point below its pre-pandemic level. While the majority of pandemic-related job losses have been in occupations where working from home was not possible, it's also true that work from home or teleworkable, if you will, jobs were not pandemic proof. College-educated women experienced larger employment losses and slower recoveries in these teleworkable jobs than their male counterparts. Moreover, recent survey evidence suggests that among those who were able to keep their jobs during the pandemic, employees are still feeling increasingly burnt out. This seems to partly reflect a feeling that they need to be available to work longer hours, even in a flexible work arrangement, with burnout seeming to escalate faster among women than among men. And it's concerning that after the progress of recent years, more women seem to be considering downshifting their careers or even leaving the workforce. And of course, not surprisingly, childcare responsibilities seem to be the main reason why some mothers, especially those with young children, have thought about leaving work. These dynamics, of course, have very important implications for both women and for the economy as a whole. Today's headlines are filled with references to labor shortages and a lack of available workers. And with women showing the largest declines in participation relative to before the crisis, progress on these labor shortages will most certainly depend on bringing women back into the labor force. At this year's Jackson Hole Symposium, one of the papers that I thought offered some important insights here by Hobjan and Sahan documented that a recovery in labor force participation often lags an improvement in the unemployment rate. This was apparent in the recovery from the 2008 financial crisis, as it took a prolonged period of a relatively hot labor market to bring many workers back into the labor force. And we may see again that a hot labor market is going to be needed to draw women back following this pandemic. At the individual level, we know even temporary absences from the labor market can have persistent effects on one's career trajectory and earnings potential. Today's depressed labor force participation could also affect tomorrow's progress on gender equality in the workforce. We are already seeing how the pandemic has changed the way we work, with hybrid work environments becoming the new norm for many college-educated workers. Anecdotal evidence suggests that given the choice of working from home and returning to the office, women may be less likely to return to the office than men. And so, depending on how the workplace evolves, this development could exacerbate existing gender inequality in both representation and career opportunities. Preventing this dynamic is going to be an important consideration for employers and frankly for our country as we transition to new ways of working. I'm hopeful that the insights from today's seminar will help to create a more equitable economic environment that offers the tools, the resources, and the opportunities that women need to thrive. Thank you very much for your participation in this seminar.
Thank you, President George, for your remarks. I'd also like to thank our presenters for sharing their time and expertise with us. If you can now please watch your screen, we are going to share a link to a survey, and we appreciate any feedback that you can provide about today's session. It'll only take about 2 minutes to complete. A recording of this session and the presenter slides will be made available on fedcommunities.org. While on fedcommunities.org, please also register for the third seminar in this series on furthering an inclusive recovery from COVID-19. On November 17th, the Federal Reserve Banks of Philadelphia and Atlanta will examine what we've learned from the administration of emergency rental relief and evaluate universal vouchers as a long-term solution for increasing housing security among renters. We hope you'll join us for this conversation. Again, I'd like to say thank you for joining us today. Have a good day.